The laughter echoed off the black marble walls. It was a cruel, sharp sound, cutting through the cold air of the great throne room like a serrated blade. Elara hit the floor hard. Her knees slammed against the polished obsidian stone, sending a jolt of pain up her spine. She gasped, but she swallowed the sound immediately. She would not give them the satisfaction of her pain. She kept her head down, her breathing shallow, her eyes fixed on the cold black floor that reflected her own ruined image. She was wearing white. It was supposed to be a wedding gown, but it was nothing more than a cheap, ill-fitting dress made of coarse fabric. The hem was stained with winter mud from the long journey. The sleeves were frayed, and tangled in her auburn hair was a bridal veil, torn and dirty, though the faint glint of silver thread still caught the light of the torches. "Behold, your Majesty!" a voice boomed over the laughter. It was Alpha Thorn, the man who had destroyed her pack, the man who had reduced her to a nameless servant, and who had now dragged her across the continent to serve as a political punchline. Thorn stepped forward, his heavy boots echoing on the marble. He grabbed Elara by the shoulder and roughly yanked her upright. She stumbled, her bare feet slipping on the stone, but she forced her legs to lock. She stood. She was trembling from the biting cold of the obsidian peaks, but she forced her spine to straighten. "I bring you a gift, Alpha King," Thorn sneered, gesturing widely to the laughing courtiers who filled the grand hall. "I heard the Winter Court was offering their highest noblewoman for your hand. I heard the southern packs were sending their fiercest warriors. But I, Alpha Thorn, bring you the ultimate prize, a bride of absolute submission." The court erupted into fresh laughter, the cruel, mocking sound of hundreds of wolves reveling in the humiliation of a broken girl. "She is an Omega," Thorn continued, his voice dripping with venomous amusement. "Weak, voiceless, packless. I present to you the joke of the century, the Omega bride." Elara stared straight ahead. Her pale green eyes were fixed on the base of the massive throne at the far end of the hall. Her heart hammered wildly against her ribs like a trapped bird, but her face remained a mask of frozen stone. She did not cry. She refused to cry. They had taken her home. He had taken her family. They had stripped her of her name and her rights, but they could not take her dignity. Her hands, hidden in the folds of the ruined white dress, curled into tight fists. She dug her fingernails into her own palms until the skin broke. The sharp sting of pain grounded her. It kept the tears from falling. High above the laughing crowd, seated upon a throne carved from a single piece of black obsidian, sat Kaelen Vance, the Alpha King of the Obsidian Peaks. He did not laugh. He did not smile. He sat in absolute, terrifying stillness. He wore a tunic of midnight blue velvet, clasped at the shoulder with silver wolf heads. His amber eyes, flecked with dark shadows, swept over the hall with the cold detachment of a predator watching fools play in a graveyard. Kaelen hated the politics of the court. He hated the arrogance of alphas like Thorn, who used cruelty to mask their own incompetence. He looked down at the girl in the center of the room. She was small, fragile, shivering in a dress that offered no warmth. But he noticed her eyes. They were not the eyes of a broken prey animal. They were terrifyingly calm. And then something strange happened. Beneath the heavy scent of perfumes, sweat, and arrogant alphas, a new scent drifted through the massive hall. It was impossibly faint, a whisper in the dark. Rain. Cold, fresh rain falling on crushed mint. Kaelen's jaw locked. His fingers tightened around the heavy silver signet ring on his right hand. Deep within his chest, a low, primal vibration began to hum. His wolf, which had been silent and indifferent for years, suddenly scratched at the cage of his ribs. It was a violent, desperate reaction that made Kaelen's breath catch. Down on the floor, Elara felt a sudden, searing heat flare on her collarbone. The faint crescent scar hidden beneath her dress began to burn. It felt like a branding iron pressed against her skin. She bit the inside of her cheek to keep from crying out. The blood from her clenched fists finally pooled. A single dark drop fell from her fingertips. It hit the black marble floor with a tiny, silent splash. But to Kaelen, the sound of that single drop of blood hitting the stone was louder than a war horn. The scent of rain and crushed mint spiked, piercing through an invisible barrier that had kept it hidden. It hit Kaelen with the force of a physical blow. His amber eyes widened for a fraction of a second, the pupils expanding until the gold was almost completely swallowed by black. Mate. The word echoed in Kaelen's mind, not spoken, but roared by the ancient beast inside him. Alpha Thorn, oblivious to the shift in the room's atmosphere, raised his hand to shove Elara back down to her knees. "Bow to your king, little beggar," Thorn barked. He never finished the sentence. Kaelen moved. He did not step down from the throne, he surged from it. The sheer force of his alpha aura exploded across the hall like a shock, a wave of freezing air. The laughter died instantly. The heavy, suffocating pressure of his power slammed into the chests of every wolf in the room, driving the breath from their lungs. The silence that followed was not merely quiet. It was the heavy, terrifying silence of a guillotine blade suspended in the air. Kaelen stood at the edge of the dais, his massive frame towering over the room. His amber eyes were no longer detached, they were burning, and they were fixed entirely on the girl in the torn veil. The air in the great throne room turned to lead. It was a physical weight pressing down on the shoulders of every courtier, every guard, and every noble alpha who had been laughing just seconds before. The suffocating pressure of the Alpha King's aura radiated from the dais, cold and ancient, freezing the breath in their lungs. Kaelen Vance descended the black marble steps. He moved with a terrifying, deliberate slowness. There was no rush in his stride, no frantic rage. It was the calm, methodical approach of an apex predator who had already won the hunt simply by entering the clearing. The heavy fabric of his midnight blue tunic swept against the stone, the only sound in a hall that had been suddenly shocked into absolute silence. Alpha Thorn, still standing beside Elara with his hand raised, froze. The sneer melted from his face, replaced by a sudden sickening pale hue. He could feel the king's killing intent rolling off him in waves. Ara did not move. Her heart battered against her ribs, and the crescent scar on her collarbone burned with a searing, relentless heat that made her vision blur at the edges. She could smell him now. Beneath the sharp, metallic tang of his intimidating aura was something deeper. Pine needles trapped in winter ice, and the heavy electric scent of an approaching thunderstorm. It was a scent that made her dormant wolf, buried deep beneath years of magical suppression, twitch in the darkness. She expected a blow. She expected the Alpha King to strike her down for daring to bleed on his polished floors, or to join in the mockery as so many others had. But as Kaelen stopped merely 3 feet away from her, the blow never came. Thorn, desperate to salvage his cruel presentation, and misinterpreting the king's silence, swallowed hard. Your Majesty, Thorn stammered, his voice cracking under the oppressive weight of the room. I apologize if the Omega offends your sight. I will make her kneel immediately. She needs to learn her. Take one more breath in her direction. Kaelen's voice cut through the hall. It was low, barely above a whisper, yet it carried a resonance that vibrated in the teeth of everyone present. And it will be your last. Thorn choked. He stumbled backward, his hands flying up in a pathetic gesture of surrender. The sheer terror in his eyes was absolute. His knees buckled under the invisible pressure of Kaelen's command, and the cruel Alpha hit the floor, kneeling against his will, gasping for air that suddenly felt too thick to breathe. Kaelen stepped forward. He did not look at Thorn. He simply moved, positioning his massive frame directly between Elara and the rest of the court. He turned his back on the hundreds of noble wolves, facing only her. He became a wall, a silent, impenetrable shield, blocking her from the mocking eyes, the cruel whispers, and the arrogant alphas. The sudden relief of having the crowd's attention severed from her was so profound that Elara almost swayed. But she caught herself. She locked her knees, lifted her chin, and forced herself to look up into the face of the most feared lichen on the continent. Kaelen stared down at her. His amber eyes, usually so cold and detached, were swirling with a dark, violent storm. His wolf was screaming at him to claim her, to wrap her in his cloak, to tear the throat out of the man who had pushed her to the floor. The scent of rain and crushed mint was intoxicating, pulling at the very marrow of his bones. She was his mate. The fate he had long believed was denied to him. But he also saw the rigid tension in her fragile frame. He saw the way her fists were clenched so tightly that a second drop of blood threatened to fall. He saw the defensive, unbroken pride in her pale green eyes. She was waiting for the trap to spring. She was waiting for him to hurt her. Kaelen exerted every ounce of his legendary iron control. He commanded his wolf to sit. He would not touch her. He would not overwhelm her. He would not behave like the monsters who had brought her here. Slowly, deliberately, Kaelen raised his right hand. Elara's breath hitched, her muscles bracing for impact. But his hand did not reach for her throat or her face. His long, calloused fingers reached for the torn piece of the bridal veil hanging limply beside her cheek. He touched the fabric, just the fabric. Elara watched, her chest rising and falling rapidly, as the Alpha King rubbed the torn edge of the veil between his thumb and forefinger. To the rest of the court, it looked like a moment of bizarre fascination. But Kaelen's heightened senses were analyzing everything. The fabric was cheap, harsh linen, meant to chafe the skin. But the thread woven through it, the thread that caught the light of the silver torches, was different. The dirt rubbed away beneath Kaelen's thumb, revealing a gleam that was unmistakable. It was not silk. It was not dyed cotton. It was pure, spun silver. Kaelen's breath slowed. The history of the wolf kingdoms was etched into his mind. There was only one bloodline in the history of the world capable of spinning raw, unheated silver into thread without breaking it. A bloodline of healers, seers, and untamed power. The Silver Moon bloodline, the true white wolves. A bloodline that was supposedly eradicated 3 centuries ago. They had brought him an Omega to mock. But standing before him, shivering in a ruined dress, with her hands bleeding to protect her own dignity, was a ghost of royalty. Kaelen let the veil drop from his fingers. He looked back into Elara's eyes, and for the first time since she had been shoved into this nightmare, she saw something in an alpha's gaze that she did not recognize. It wasn't pity. It wasn't lust. It was profound, reverent recognition. "Alpha Thorn," Kaelen said, his voice remaining low, though it echoed in the dead silence of the hall. He did not turn around to look at the man groveling on the floor behind him. "Yes, my king," Thorn wheezed from his knees. "You brought this woman into my hall to offer her as a joke," Kaelen stated, the glacial calm in his tone far more terrifying than a shout. "You paraded her in rags. You forced her to the floor." "It was meant to amuse you, Your Majesty," Thorn begged, sweat dripping from his forehead. "A political jest, a statement of—" "Silence." The word cracked like a whip. Thorn snapped his mouth shut, his teeth clicking audibly. Kaelen finally took a half step back from Elara, giving her air, giving her space. He unclasped the heavy midnight blue velvet cloak from his own shoulders. With a single fluid motion, he swept the warm, heavy garment around Elara's trembling shoulders. The scent of pine and winter ice enveloped her, instantly warming her frozen skin and sending a jolt of comforting heat straight to her core. Before Elara could react, Kaelen finally turned his head to look at Alpha Thorn over his shoulder. The amber eyes were fully black now. "If you ever speak of her again, if you ever look at her again, I will tear your pack apart piece by piece," Kaelen said, his voice vibrating with absolute finality. "She is no longer your property. She is no longer your joke." Kaelen turned his attention back to Elara, offering her a slight, subtle nod of respect that sent a fresh wave of shock rippling through the court. "Come with me," the king commanded quietly, meant only for her ears. "We are leaving this hall."
Hear my words
The heavy oak
closely,
doors of the king's private library closed with a solid, echoing thud, cutting off the distant murmurs of the great throne room. Instantly, the oppressive atmosphere of the court vanished. The library was a sanctuary of quiet warmth. Firelight danced in a massive stone hearth, casting a golden glow over towering shelves of ancient leather-bound tomes. The air here smelled of old paper, aged wood smoke, and the sharp, clean scent of the king himself. Elara stood near the center of the room, dwarfed by the heavy midnight blue cloak still wrapped securely around her shoulders. She was no longer shivering from the ambient cold, but fine tremors still raced through her limbs. She kept her chin level, her pale green eyes tracking Kaelen as he walked past her toward the hearth. He did not hover. He did not crowd her. He deliberately put 10 feet of distance between them, tossing a log into the fire before turning to face her. He leaned against the stone mantel, his massive arms crossed loosely over his chest, his amber eyes studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Sit," Kaelen offered, his voice a low, smooth rumble. He nodded toward a plush velvet armchair near the fire. "I prefer to stand, Your Majesty," Elara replied. Her voice was slightly hoarse from disuse, but it did not shake. Kaelen's brow twitched. Any other Omega, any other wolf in the kingdom, would have collapsed into the chair, weeping with relief or cowering in fear. But she stood there like a solitary pillar of stone, wrapped in his cloak, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "You are not a prisoner here," Kaelen said quietly. "Alpha Thorn told the court I was a gift," Elara answered, her tone meticulously neutral. Gifts do not usually dictate their own placement. Thorn is a fool who will be dealt with in due time, Kaelen said, his jaw tightening at the mention of the man. You are not his property, and you are not a joke. Who are you? Elara hesitated. Her fingers curled tightly into the soft velvet of his cloak. I am Elara, a servant of the lower packs. Servants of the lower packs do not weave their garments with raw silver thread, Kaelen countered softly. He uncrossed his arms, taking a single, slow step toward her. And they do not possess a scent that makes my wolf want to tear the doors off their hinges to reach them. Elara's breath hitched. She instinctively took a half-step back. The crescent scar on her collarbone, hidden beneath the cheap, mud-stained fabric of her dress, flared with a sudden, vicious heat. It felt as if a branding iron had been pressed directly against her flesh. She winced, her hand flying up to press against the base of her throat. Kaelen stopped immediately. His heightened senses picked up the subtle change in her heart rate, the slight gasp of pain, and there it was again, the scent. It pushed through the air, fighting against some invisible weight. Rain. Cold, fresh rain falling on crushed mint. It was beautiful, intoxicating, and completely wrong. Not the scent itself, but the way it moved. It did not flow naturally from her skin. It stuttered, it strained. It felt as if it was leaking through a cracked dam. Kaelen's eyes darkened as realization dawned on him. Someone sealed your scent, he murmured, his voice laced with sudden, cold fury. Magic. Dark, old magic. They bound your wolf and masked your scent to hide what you are. Elara looked up at him, her eyes wide with shock. For 17 years, she had been told she was defective, a weak, scentless Omega, whose wolf had never awakened. But the burning on her collarbone, the way the king's amber eyes seemed to pierce straight through the lies of her past, it terrified her. I don't know what you are talking about, she whispered. The pain in your collarbone, Kaelen said gently, noticing how her hand still clutched her throat. It burns when I am near, doesn't it? Elara could not lie. The pain was too sharp, too undeniable. She gave a single, jerky nod. Kaelen closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, fighting the agonizing pull of the mate bond. His wolf was howling, demanding he close the distance, demanding he claim what fate had hidden from him. But she was terrified, bruised, and wearing the rags of a mock bride. He would not claim her in fear. He would earn her trust first. You are safe here, Elara, Kaelen promised, his voice carrying the absolute weight of a king's vow. Whatever spell was placed upon you, I will break it. Whatever bloodline you belong to, I will protect it. Before Elara could process the magnitude of his words, the heavy oak doors of the library flew open with a violent crash. Kaelen's head snapped toward the intrusion, a vicious snarl ripping from his throat. Standing in the doorway, flanked by 4 elite royal guards, was the Queen Mother. She was a tall, imposing woman, draped in silver fox furs, her eyes as cold and calculating as winter frost. Beside her stood Lady Vesper, the intended political bride from the northern valleys, wearing a magnificent gown of white silk and diamonds that made Elara's ruined dress look even more pathetic. What is the meaning of this, Kaelen? The Queen Mother demanded, sweeping into the room with an air of absolute authority. Her cold eyes landed on Elara, narrowing with undisguised disgust. You abandon the royal banquet? You humiliate Lady Vesper before the entire council for this stray? Watch your tone, Mother, Kaelen warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal register. He stepped smoothly between Elara and the intruders, his protective instincts surging. Lady Vesper stepped forward, her beautiful face twisted in a sneer. "Your Majesty, that creature is a mockery, a dirty Omega sent to insult my family and our union. She should be thrown to the frozen wastes for interrupting the sacred rites." Kaelen's eyes locked onto Vesper, the amber bee leading into solid black. "She is under my protection. Speak of her death again, Vesper, and you will find your own." The Queen Mother gasped in theatrical outrage, but her eyes gleamed with a sharp political cunning. She reached into the folds of her furs and pulled out a heavy scroll bound in black iron, an ancient decree of the Obsidian Council. "You speak of protection, my son, but you forget the laws that keep you on that throne," the Queen Mother said smoothly, unrolling the scroll. "The law demands that any interference with the royal union, any mockery of the High Court, must be punished by exile to the Dead Peaks. You cannot protect a criminal without breaking the covenant of the Alpha King." She held the decree forward, her lips curling into a triumphant, venomous smile. "Give the girl to the guards, Kaelen, or forfeit the loyalty of your entire kingdom." The library, moments ago a sanctuary of warmth, turned as cold as a frozen grave. Kaelen stared at the heavy iron scroll in his mother's hands. The covenant of the Alpha King. It was the ancient bedrock of the Obsidian Peaks, a set of laws so absolute that even the king himself could not violate them without inviting a lawful rebellion from the High Council. "You dare invoke the covenant against me in my own sanctuary." Kaelen's voice was dangerously soft, a lethal purr that made the 4 elite guards behind the Queen Moth shift nervously. "I invoke it to save this kingdom from your momentary madness," the Queen Mother replied smoothly, her chin held high. "You are mesmerized by an intruder, a nameless Omega sent to insult our court. The law is clear, Kaelen. Treason and mockery of the crown are punishable by exile to the Dead Peaks. To protect her is to declare war on your own laws." "She is not an intruder." Kaelen stepped closer, the sheer force of his presence causing the flames in the hearth to flicker and dim. "She is a criminal," Lady Vesper interrupted, stepping out from behind the Queen Mother. Her face was flushed with spite. She snapped her fingers, and 2 more guards entered the library, dragging a small, weeping figure between them. It was a young Omega servant girl, barely 14 years old, her hands bound roughly with coarse rope. "We caught this little rat trying to flee the kitchens," Vesper sneered, gesturing to the sobbing child. "She confessed that she helped the false bride slip past the outer gates. Conspiracy against the throne. If you will not exile the bride, Your Majesty, then the law demands we execute the accomplice." Elara's breath hitched. She didn't know the girl. She had never seen her before in her life. Vesper had simply grabbed a vulnerable servant to use as leverage, knowing that a true Omega's instinct was to protect the weak. "Please," the young girl sobbed, falling to her knees on the stone floor. "I didn't do anything. Please, my king." Kaelen's hands curled into fists so tight his knuckles turned white. His amber eyes burned with a murderous rage. He could slaughter the guards in a heartbeat. He could snap Vesper's neck before she even blinked. But if he did, the council would instantly declare a blood feud. The kingdom would tear itself apart in civil war, and in the chaos, Elara would be hunted down. His mother had trapped him in a cage of politics and ancient law. Kaelen opened his mouth to order the guards to stand down, prepared to risk the war anyway. But a soft, steady movement caught his eye. Elara stepped out from behind his massive frame. Kaelen turned, his heart lurching. "Elara, no! Stay behind me!" She looked up at him. Her pale green eyes were clear, entirely devoid of the panic that should have consumed her. She saw the impossible choice weighing on his broad shoulders. He was a good king, trapped by corrupt laws, and he was willing to burn his own kingdom to keep her safe. But she would not let innocent blood be spilled for her. A true queen did not hide while her people suffered. "A king must protect his people," Elara said softly, her voice steady and resolute. She reached up and unclasped the heavy midnight blue cloak he had wrapped around her. The velvet pooled on the floor, leaving her standing once again in the torn, mud-stained idle gown. Kaelen reached for her, his wolf howling in protest, but she stepped out of his reach. She turned her back on safety and faced the Queen Mother and Lady Vesper. "Let the child go," Elara commanded. It was not a plea. For a girl in rags, her tone carried an eerie, unbreakable authority that made even the elite guards hesitate. "I am the one who offended your court. I am the one Alpha Thorn brought to mock you. The child knows nothing. Take me to your judgment and release her." Lady Vesper's smile was a cruel, triumphant slash across her face. "How noble! The trash wishes to be a martyr." "Release the servant," the Queen Mother ordered the guards smoothly, "and take the false bride back to the great throne room. The council awaits her sentencing at the base of the Obsidian throne." The guards let the sobbing girl go. Two of them approached Elara, grabbing her roughly by the arms. Kaelen let out a visceral, terrifying snarl, stepping forward to intercept them, but Elara looked back at him over her shoulder. "Trust me," her pale green eyes seemed to say. "Do not start a war." The Queen Mother stepped close to Elara as the guards dragged her past. "You thought you could seduce a king with a pitiful face," she whispered, her voice dripping with dark magic. "You are nothing but an Omega defect." As the Queen Mother's magical aura brushed against her, Elara gasped in agony. The dark magic that had sealed her scent for 17 years reacted violently to the Queen Mother's proximity. The crescent scar on Elara was collarbone ignited. It did not just burn this time. It felt as though the skin was splitting open from the inside. Elara bit through her lip, tasting copper, refusing to scream as they dragged her out of the warm library and back into the freezing, echoing expanse of the great throne room. The crowd of nobles had not dispersed. They parted like a black sea as the guards forced Elara down the center aisle. Whispers of disgust and anticipation filled the air. They dragged her to the very base of the massive obsidian throne, forcing her to her knees on the cold black stone. Directly beneath her knees, embedded in the black marble, was the ancient Moonstone, a relic of the first Lycan kings, dull and lifeless for centuries. Kaelen followed them out, his presence a dark, suffocating storm of fury. He marched down the aisle, his eyes fixed on the guards holding his mate. He didn't care about the Covenant anymore. He didn't care about the war. He was going to end this. But before he could reach the dais, Elara bowed her head, overwhelmed by the searing pain in her chest. The glowing crescent scar on her collarbone finally split. A single drop of blood, bright and heavy with ancient power, fell from her skin. It landed directly onto the center of the lifeless Moonstone. The drop of blood hit the lifeless Moonstone with a sound no louder than a pin falling on velvet. For a single heartbeat, the great throne room remained frozen. The sneer was still etched on Lady Vesper's face. The Queen Mother still stood tall, clutching the iron decree. Alpha Thorn still knelt near the periphery, sweating and humiliated. And Kaelen Vance was mid-stride, his massive frame radiating lethal intent as he closed the distance to his mate. Then the stone woke up. It did not crack or explode, it simply breathed. A pulse of pure, blinding silver light erupted from the ancient obsidian floor, expanding outward in a perfect, silent ring. The light climbed the black marble steps, illuminating the dark hall with the brilliance of a full moon brought to earth. With the light came the scent. The dark magic that had bound Elara's true nature for 17 years shattered like fragile glass. The invisible dam broke, and the scent of cold rain and crushed mint flooded the cavernous room. It was not the weak, subtle scent of an omega. It was a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated sovereign power. It washed over the courtiers, sinking into their senses, heavy and intoxicating. The sheer pressure of the silver moon aura slammed into the crowd. It was not the aggressive, suffocating domination of Kaelen's Alpha Command. It was something older, a serene, absolute authority that bypassed the mind and commanded the very blood in their veins. Nobles who had laughed at her mere minutes ago found their knees buckling. They collapsed against the cold floor, unable to bear the weight of her sudden presence. Lady Vesper let out a strangled gasp, her flawless white silk gown pooling around her as the invisible gravity of the true queen forced her down. The Queen Mother staggered backward, the iron decree slipping from her trembling fingers and clattering uselessly against the stone. The agonizing fire on Elara's collarbone vanished, replaced by a rush of icy, liberating clarity. The dormant wolf inside her, silenced, starved, and hidden in the dark, finally opened its eyes. Elara did not stay on her knees. Slowly, smoothly, she stood up. The cheap, mud-stained bridal gown she wore no longer looked like a tragic mockery. Bathed in the ethereal silver light of the Moonstone, the torn fabric seemed to glow. The scrap of the silver veil still clinging to her hair caught the light, proving its royal origin. She raised her head, her pale green eyes now rimmed with a glowing, luminescent silver. She looked out over the sea of wolves who had mocked her, her expression one of untouchable, quiet dignity. Kaelen stopped at the base of the dais. The storm in his amber eyes cleared, replaced by a profound, earth-shattering awe. The mate bond snapped fully into place, a roaring tether of fate that tied his soul directly to hers. His wolf did not want to dominate the woman standing in the silver light. His wolf wanted to lay the world at her bare, bruised feet. She was magnificent. "Witchcraft!" a voice suddenly shrieked, breaking the sacred silence. It was Alpha Thorn, the cruel Alpha, driven entirely mad by the realization of what he had brought to the capital and the sheer terror of the power radiating from the girl he had abused, lost whatever was left of his mind. He knew his life was forfeit. He knew his pack was doomed. In a frantic, suicidal bid to eliminate the source of his ruin, Thorn drew a concealed silver hunting blade from his boot. "Defective Omega Witch!" Thorn roared, launching himself desperately toward the dais, aiming the blade straight for Elara's back. Elara did not flinch. Her glowing eyes did not even widen. She stood perfectly still, anchored by the ancient power flowing up from the stone beneath her feet. She knew she did not have to turn around. Kaelen Vance moved faster than a mortal eye could track. He did not shift into his massive black lichen form. He didn't need to. He intercepted Thorn's desperate lunge with the brutal, precise efficiency of the war king he was. Kaelen's hand clamped around Thorn's wrist, stopping the blade inches from Elara. The sound of Thorn's bones splintering under the king's grip echoed sharply through the silent hall. Thorn screamed, dropping the dagger, but Kaelen did not let him fall. He grabbed the Alpha by the throat, lifting his heavy body entirely off the floor with one arm. The silver light of the Moonstone caught Kaelen's profile, his jaw locked, his amber eyes burning with absolute protective fury as he held the would-be assassin suspended in the air. "You brought me a bride, Alpha Thorn," Kaelen whispered, his voice vibrating with deadly calm. "And you raised a blade against her in my hall." Kaelen held Thorn suspended in the air, the massive king's grip like an iron vice around the traitor's throat. Thorn's legs kicked weakly, his eyes bulging with terror, the silver dagger lying useless on the black marble floor below. The court watched in breathless silence. They expected blood. They expected the War King to tear the Alpha's throat out right there on the steps of the Obsidian throne. But Kaelen Vance was not a mindless beast. He was a ruler, and true power did not require a slaughter to prove its weight. With a look of absolute disgust, Kaelen opened his hand. Thorn crashed to the floor, gasping and coughing, clutching his bruised throat and his shattered wrist. He scrambled backward, trying to put distance between himself and the king, but there was nowhere to run. The silver light of the Moonstone bathed the hall, trapping him in the undeniable truth of his crimes. "You are stripped of your title," Kaelen's voice rang out, cold and definitive, echoing off the high stone walls. "You are stripped of your lands, your pack, and your name. You will leave the Obsidian Peaks tonight with nothing but the clothes on your back. If you are found within my borders by sunrise, you will be hunted not as an alpha, but as a rogue beast." Thorn opened his mouth to beg, but the oppressive weight of Kaelen's aura forced his head down against the stone. He could not speak. He was broken, utterly and publicly dismantled. Kaelen turned away from the ruin of the former Alpha and fixed his burning amber gaze on the two women standing frozen near the library doors. Lady Vesper was trembling, her pristine white silk gown offering no defense against the freezing reality of her lost crown. Beside her, the Queen Mother stood rigid. Her silver fox furs looked suddenly heavy, her regal posture fraying at the edges. On the floor between them lay the heavy iron scroll, the covenant of the Alpha King, which she had tried to use as a weapon. Kaelen walked slowly toward them. His heavy boots crushed the edge of the iron scroll against the floor. "You knew," Kaelen said softly. The quietness of his voice was far more terrifying than a shout. The Queen Mother raised her chin, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. "I did what was necessary for the Obsidian Peaks. A forgotten bloodline brings no armies, Kaelen, no alliances. The Silver Moon wolves are myths, ghosts. Lady Vesper brings the northern valleys. I bound the girl's scent to protect your throne from your own fatalistic instincts. You use dark magic to mutilate a true mate bond," Kaelen corrected, his jaw locking. You colluded with a minor alpha to have her brought here as a joke, hoping the humiliation would break her spirit before my wolf ever recognized her. You violated the very covenant you tried to execute her with. Lady Vesper took a stumbling step backward. Your Majesty, I did not know about the magic. You only reveled in her suffering, Kaelen interrupted, not even looking at Vesper. You demanded the execution of an innocent child to force my hand. Pack your things, Lady Vesper. The alliance with the Northern Valleys is dissolved. If your father has an issue with it, tell him he is welcome to march on my borders.
Move aside, fool.
He turned his full attention back to his mother. The silence in the court was absolute. No one dared to breathe as the Alpha King confronted the matriarch of the realm. You are stripped of your seat on the High Council, Kaelen declared, his voice devoid of any familial warmth. You will retire to the Eastern Estate. You will never set foot in the great throne room again. Your political games end tonight. The Queen Mother's face went pale. She opened her mouth to argue, to invoke her status, but the sheer, crushing finality in her son's eyes silenced her. She gathered her furs and turned, walking stiffly out of the hall, followed by a weeping Lady Vesper. The doors closed behind them, sealing their exile. The court remained on their knees, heads bowed. The corruption had been excised. The lies were burned away. Kaelen turned slowly back to the dais. Elara was still standing there. The torn, mud-stained bridal gown she wore still caught the ethereal light of the Moonstone beneath her feet. The silver thread in her ruined veil shimmered. She looked impossibly fragile, yet possessed a gravity that made the massive black marble hall feel small. Her pale green eyes, ringed with the glowing silver of her awakened bloodline, watched him intently. She had not said a word during his judgment. She had simply existed in her power, a silent witness to the justice she was owed. Kaelen approached the base of the steps and stopped. The violent protective storm of his alpha aura vanished entirely. He deliberately pulled his power back, leashing his wolf, making himself as unthreatening as a man of his size could possibly be. He looked up at her, standing above him on the dais, and the king of the Obsidian Peaks lowered his head. It was not a full kneel, but a deep, respectful bow of accountability. "I am sorry," Kaelen said, his voice carrying the raw, unguarded truth of a man bearing his soul. "I am sorry that I did not find you sooner. I am sorry that you were dragged across this continent in chains. And I am deeply, profoundly sorry that you were forced to endure even a single minute of mockery within my walls." Elara looked down at the dark hair of the bowing king. The scent of rain and crushed mint swirled around them, no longer broken or bleeding, but whole. Her heart, which had been locked behind walls of ice and fear for 17 years, beat with a steady, powerful rhythm. "They told me I was nothing, Your Majesty," Elara spoke, her voice clear and resonant, reaching every corner of the silent hall. "They put me in a torn dress to prove it." Kaelen raised his head. His amber eyes locked onto hers, filled with an agonizing weight. "But dignity is not woven into fabric," Elara continued quietly, her gaze sweeping over the kneeling court before returning to him. "And a crown does not make a queen. Truth does." She stepped off the glowing Moonstone, descending one marble step to stand closer to him. The silver light followed her, illuminating the space between them. "You did not mock me, Kaelen Vance," she said softly, using his name for the first time. "You shielded me when I was a stranger. You risked a war for a ragged servant. That is the truth I see." Kaelen's chest hitched. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly. A man who had faced armies without blinking, now terrified of spooking the woman in front of him. "Then let me show you the rest," Kaelen whispered. "Let me show you where you belong." Kaelen's hand remained suspended in the space between them. The long, calloused fingers of the War King trembled infinitesimally. It was a gesture of profound vulnerability, an offering not of command, but of choice. Elara looked at his hand and then up into his amber eyes. She saw the absolute devotion burning there, stripped of all political pretense and alpha arrogance. He was not asking her to submit. He was asking her to stand beside him. Slowly, Elara reached out. Her small, pale fingers slid into his massive palm. The moment their skin met, the mate bond flared with blinding intensity. It was no longer a searing, agonizing burn of suppressed magic. It was a rush of pure, unadulterated warmth. The scent of cold rain and crushed mint merged seamlessly with the sharp, grounding fragrance of pine needles and winter ice. A profound sense of completeness settled over them both, settling deep into the marrow of their bones. Kaelen exhaled a shaky breath, his thumb gently brushing the back of her bruised hand. He made to lead her up the steps, prepared to guide her to the seat of power. But Elara gently squeezed his fingers, silently asking him to wait. She released his hand and turned toward the massive obsidian throne. She did not need to be carried. She did not need to be led. The girl who had been pushed to the floor, who had bled to protect her own pride, walked up the remaining black marble step under her own power. The heavy midnight blue cloak Kaelen had given her swept across the stone behind her, trailing like a royal mantle over the cheap, mud-stained fabric of her torn dress. Every eye in the great throne room followed her ascent. When she reached the top, she did not immediately sit. She stood before the imposing black chair, carved from the ancient bedrock of the mountains. Beside the throne burned a tall iron brazier, its silver flames casting dancing shadows across the hall. Elara reached up to her tangled auburn hair. Her fingers found the torn, dirty scrap of the bridal veil that Alpha Thorn had forced upon her. The silver thread glimmered faintly as she pulled it free. She looked at the ragged fabric. It represented 17 years of silence, pain, and hiding. It represented the cruelty of a pack that had viewed her as nothing more than a joke to be traded. With a calm, steady hand, Elara dropped the veil into the silver fire. The flames consumed it instantly, flaring bright and high, reducing the symbol of her humiliation to nothing but ash. The court watched in absolute silence as the last physical tether to her past burned away. Then, she turned and took her seat on the obsidian throne. The moment her body settled against the dark stone, the magic of the Silver Moon bloodline resonated with the ancient bedrock of the kingdom. Veins of luminescent silver light spiderwebbed across the black obsidian, tracing ancient runes of protection and prosperity that had not been seen in 2 centuries. The throne itself was welcoming its true master. Kaelen Vance walked up the steps, his heavy boots making no sound. He stopped directly in front of the throne. He was a king in his own right, the ruler of the Obsidian Peaks, a man whose mere name struck terror into the hearts of rival packs. Yet, as he looked at Elara, bathed in the silver light of her ancestors, there was no pride left in him to defend. There was only reverence. The Alpha King lowered his massive frame, dropping to one knee on the black marble. He bowed his head, placing his right hand over his heart. I, Kaelen Vance, King of the Obsidian Peaks, pledge my life, my wolf, and my kingdom to you. His voice rang out, deep and resonant, filling every corner of the vast hall. I bind my soul to yours. You are my mate. You are my equal. And before the eyes of the moon and the laws of this earth, I name you my queen. A collective rustle echoed through the great throne room. The hundreds of courtiers, nobles, and guards who had already been kneeling on the floor lowered themselves even further. They bowed their heads until their foreheads touched the cold stone, baring their necks in the ultimate, undeniable gesture of wolf submission. The mocking laughter of the past was dead and buried. There was only the heavy, reverent silence of a pack recognizing their true Luna. Elara looked down at the War King kneeling at her feet. She reached out, her fingers gently tracing the dark hair at the nape of his neck. Kaelen leaned into her touch, a low, rumbling purr vibrating in his chest, a sound of absolute peace that his wolf had never made before. He lifted his head, his amber eyes locking onto her pale green ones. The dark storms were gone. The feral edge was soothed. "Stand, my king," Elara whispered softly, a gentle smile touching her lips for the first time since she had arrived. "You have protected me enough for one night. Now we rule together." Kaelen rose, taking her hand once more. He pressed a long, tender kiss to her knuckles, sealing the bond not with a bite of ownership, but with a vow of devotion. Outside the high arched windows, the heavy clouds of the Obsidian Peaks finally broke. The light of a brilliant, full silver moon poured into the hall, washing over the king and queen, illuminating a kingdom that had been forever changed by the quiet, unbreakable dignity of a mocked bride. She had walked into the hall as a joke. She would walk out as a legend. A true queen is not made by a crown. She is revealed by the dignity no one could take from her. Which moment proved she was the true Luna to you? Was it her refusal to cry, or her choice to protect the innocent servant? If you enjoy emotional mate bond stories filled with dignity, truth, and royal justice, subscribe and come back for the next story.